terms of New Zealand, because I know that you know quite a bit of coming from New Zealand yourself, that's sort of a story or an experience of going from a militarised society moving into a nuclear weapons-free country. And if you could sort of talk us through those issues that New Zealand faced, going through those dynamics internally, and how that began, and what the government, especially the government's role in that sort of, in those sort of changes.
Yeah, well, you're quite correct. New Zealand was a very militarised society. We were involved in virtually every war that we could get into. The Boer War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, the First World War, the Second World War, the Malaya incident. Yeah, we would join them all. Okay. And our own society was quite militaristic. We had our own wars in there. We had the land wars back in the 1800s. Okay. And yeah, it's quite a militarised. And we were a very strong part of the ANZUS alliance, Australia, New Zealand and the United States. And we welcomed nuclear weapons into our ports. We supported the nuclear testing in the Pacific. But then what there was, in a sense, a public education initiative about nuclear weapons, what their destructive impact would be if they were used on cities, and what their destructive impact was of in the testing. And we saw the deformed babies and the stillbirths and the horror from the nuclear tests. And that's during peacetime, hundreds of miles from populations, how much more devastating it would be during war. So gradually New Zealanders start saying, look, these nuclear weapons are inhumane, they're illogic, you know, that having a nuclear weapon doesn't protect you, it actually makes you a target for the nuclear weapons of the other side. So we have to say no to nuclear weapons. So we did that, and as a result of that, the United States was not very happy, of course, said, well, okay, this ANZUS, our military alliance, is no longer operable. So New Zealand had to rethink its idea of security. I mean, we had been thinking of security as military security, where you protect yourselves by having a big defence, and if you can't have your own big defence and you have a bigger guy, you know, your big brother, who can come and help you. And in fact our big brother had come and helped us. I mean, when Japan was coming down in the Second World War, they were about to attack Australia, pretty close to New Zealand, and the United States basically saved us. So we had a historical backing for that. So we had to go, oh dear, we have to think of a new way now of providing for security in situations like that. So we turned very much to the United Nations. And looking at the United Nations as a much stronger mechanism. Well, it wasn't even in existence in the Second World War, as a mechanism that could be used to solve conflicts with other countries, to address the issues of aggression. You know, that there is a possibility within the United Nations to do that. So we turned very much to that, and we also turned to the idea of supporting UN peacekeeping operations. So New Zealand changed its military to fit in more with the UN peacekeeping, and not so much with working with a coalition, the United States coalitions. Well, it's different from the different governments. I mean, the United States, for example, doesn't need nuclear weapons. I mean, if you're looking at the idea of what they're there for, which is to deter another country from attacking by having, you know, a strong physical force, the United States has got the biggest armies, the biggest military, the biggest capacity for force projection and use of force of any country. So for deterrence, if there is a role for nuclear weapons in deterrence, and it's not the big countries that need them, it would be the little countries that don't have strong military. Yeah, so the US is a big country, it's a huge military, it could easily get rid of its nuclear weapons tomorrow if it felt like it. So that's not the reason that they're holding on to them. I mean, they're holding on to them because it gives them another powerful position. It's another tool to add to their quiver of power. So in that respect, you have to convince them that they will be better off in terms of their relationships with other countries if they're non-nuclear. And there, you know, like better trade, you know, better relations, interrelations with other countries.
And you could actually be seen as a security maximiser.
Yeah. Now, I think a number of them already realise that. And so you have some of the candidates, for example, the president, saying they will lead initiatives for a nuclear weapons-free world. Where are the forces that are stopping them? Well, it's those who have a vested interest in the nuclear weapons. So these are the scientists who are designing the weapons and modernising them, and the corporations that are making them. So that's the area in the United States, for example, where there needs to be effort. There needs to be effort to isolate the corporations that are making nuclear weapons and stop funding them. And that's not just happened by the United States. I mean, these corporations are actually on the stock market. and individual investors are investing in them. Other countries have their funds, for example, a pension fund, government funds where they're investing in the stock market, and many of them are investing in these corporations that are making nuclear weapons. And the reason they're attractive is because the subsidised corporations in the US, they can make a lot of money from a small amount of investment, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So Norway has already done that.
Okay.
Norway, between 2004 and 2006, their pension fund divested from Lockheed Martin, McDonnell Douglas, the big companies that are making nuclear weapons. We're looking for other countries to follow.
Okay.
That would help with the United States. Now, with other countries, it's a little bit different. If, for example, you're looking at India, India tested nuclear weapons and then Pakistan followed suit. Well, India did it because they saw they were going for a Security Council seat and nobody was paying them any attention.
Yeah.
They said, how come it's only like northern hemisphere countries, basically, and the West plus China, have got permanent seats on the Security Council. What about a big country like India? Don't we deserve one? Nobody's paying them any attention. They go, what gives these countries, their special position? Well, they're the ones who've got nuclear weapons. Well, maybe we'll test them. People take us a bit more seriously. That was one reason.
So status was driving
status,
that. Yeah.
And another reason was that the nuclear weapon states had not kept their agreement under the Non-proliferation Treaty to eliminate nuclear weapons. India had sort of stayed outside, saying, "Hey, we're not too sure if this is a good treaty." Then, when it continued to happen, that they didn't implement that, and India goes, "Well, if you guys aren't going to keep, your commitments to get rid of nuclear weapons, we'll try and join the club," which is what they did.
Yeah.
So for India, you would need to look at changing the Security Council. It's an anachronism that the 5 nuclear weapon states, the official ones, have got veto power in the Security Council. They're the 5 permanent. If other nuclear weapon states actually had some positive initiatives that they were committed to disarmament, then you could get India to join in. And India and Pakistan and North Korea and also China have already agreed to the idea of negotiations for a nuclear weapons convention.
Okay.
So if the other countries, the other nuclear weapon states agree to that, it won't be hard bringing them on. So as you see, for each country it's a little different. I've just talked about India and the United States. Israel, it's more part of the peace process there. One of my sort of beliefs coming from the experience of the success we've had in New Zealand, which used to be a pro-nuclear country and is now an anti-nuclear country, where the anti-nuclearism or the aversion to nuclear weapons is now shared across the board. Even the conservative political parties now support our nuclear-free zone. Our nuclear abolition legislation is supported now by over 95% of the population, whereas 20 years ago it was only barely a majority at 50%. Based on some of the experience of how we've managed to move the political, the legal and the public consciousness with this, it's my belief that it's not just one initiative that's going to help us achieve nuclear abolition, which is the title here, How to Get to Nuclear Abolition. There's not one magic pill, there's not one initiative which is going to do the whole thing. It's going to be a range of initiatives at different levels interacting with each other. I want to start with the World Court case though, because I think it's a very important place to start. Firstly, because that initiative was an initiative of collaboration between non-governmental organisations, civil society, lawyers and governments. And it wouldn't have happened without that collaboration. It was an initiative which came from civil society. It was proposed by non-governmental organisations, formed a coalition, the World Court Project, had some principal international groups like the Association of Lawyers Against Nuclear Arms, the Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and International Peace Bureau, but it actually built up a support network of 700 organisations around the world. And without that support network, the governments those ones who wanted to progress it wouldn't have had the strength to do it. And those who were sitting on the fence could have kept sitting on the fence. They wouldn't have been pushed over to supporting it without that civil society support. We also needed the legal expertise, because there are a number of governments who are asking questions. Is there strong law against nuclear weapons? And we know the sentiment, but is the law there? And what about what type of decision will we get from the court? And so there are a number of lawyers who are engaged at that stage that provided that input. And so that was very important. and we needed to have a collaborative relationship with the governments, not an adversarial relationship with governments. Now, there's times for the protests, there's times for sort of like telling governments they're doing the wrong thing, but there's also times to be able to work with them and say, how can we help you? And that's a different type of advocacy than the protest or in the streets. And that was built up very well in the World Court project. And I think we've sort of used that experience to work on some of the other initiatives. Now, once the court gave its decision, which was an incredible decision, given that the makeup of the court was not looking very good at the time we got to the court. Of the 14 judges that were sitting on this case, we had 8 from nuclear weapon states or their pro-nuclear allies. Japan, Germany and Italy were the allies there. It looked pretty bad, but the civil society again jumped in, pushed the governments, encouraged governments to turn up to the court. We couldn't turn up ourselves as NGOs, but governments could. So we encouraged them. We gave them ideas of what they could say. We gave them expert witnesses that they could present to the court. We had a wonderful expert witness from the Marshall Islands, Lee Jong Epilan. So the wonderful testimony came from the civil society encouragement. So twice as many countries turned up to this court case than any other case in the history of the court. It was an incredible, again, collaboration between civil society and governments, resulting in a very positive decision, and we've heard about that the threat or use of nuclear weapons is generally illegal, and there's an obligation to pursue disarmament negotiations in good faith. The General Assembly of the United Nations followed that up with a resolution which it's since adopted every year, calling for the implementation of that disarmament obligation through negotiations that would lead to a convention on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, a nuclear weapons convention. So we have this at the diplomatic level now, at the United Nations supported. It also gave rise and strengthened the civil society movement. Abolition 2000 managed to bring together over 2,000 organisations calling for negotiations for a nuclear weapons convention. So we've got some of that there. We haven't managed to get the key countries to negotiate a nuclear weapons convention yet. And so that's giving, like, well, a bit of despondency.